Who wants to buy bread all the time when you can have fresh, healthy, made from scratch bread anytime you want? What are three things that people frequently have to buy from the grocery store? Bread, eggs, and milk. We don't have to buy eggs anymore because a few years ago the family and I invested in some backyard chickens, and it's been so nice not having to go to the store and buy eggs. We can just go have the kids collect eggs every morning. But we don't have a cow or a milking goat, so we can't really get fresh daily milk, and we have to go to the store for that. I've spent the last decade or so mastering a way that we can have fresh, healthy bread every day without having to worry about spending tons of time in the kitchen. So, how did I get started making bread? Before my grandfather passed away, he had given my wife and I my grandmother's old bread machine. It looked like this. We brought it home, decided to make some fresh bread, and what we ended up with were two loaves of bread that resembled bricks. They were dense, heavy, and hard, and it was a terrible outcome. Some of you guys that have tried bread machines know what I'm talking about. When I was about to give up on it, somebody had suggested that I take the bread out of the bread machine after it had done its rising kneading cycle, put it in a bread pan, and let it rise throughout the day until it was risen clear to the top of the bread pan, and then bake it. Lo and behold, we had a really nice looking loaf of bread after we tried that. So I started buying 25 and 50-pound bags of high gluten bread flour from my GFS. The bread was really good, but I knew it still wasn't very healthy. And it was still a good bit of work having to get the bread machine out every 2 to 3 days, though it was far easier than the old hand kneading method and waiting for it to rise. I tried supplementing whole wheat flour for some of the high gluten white flour, but it just didn't turn out very good unless I used less than a quarter cup of the whole wheat flour. The basic recipe I had per loaf was 3/4 cup warm water, 4 tablespoons sugar, 1 teaspoon salt, 1 teaspoon instant yeast, which I would end up buying 1 pound packs at my local bulk food store for about $5 or $6. 4 teaspoons of oil, I used vegetable oil, and 2 1/4 cups of bread flour. So we used this setup for about a year before I figured out a way to make it even easier. Before I met my wife, I used to buy the frozen dough balls of Rhodes bread dough. You get it out of the freezer, plop a thing of it into a bread pan, let it rise for a couple hours, and it was pretty good. So what I decided to do, instead of taking the 2 loaves out of the bread machine, letting them rise and immediately baking them, was to take them out of the bread machine, put them into greased bread pans, and then flash freeze them. I could then store 2 frozen loaves in a 1 gallon freezer bag for later use. Then, when we wanted a loaf of bread, we would pull a frozen, unrisen loaf of bread out of the freezer the night before, slap it into a greased bread pan, and put it on the freezer overnight. We'd wake up in the morning, it'd be perfectly risen and ready to bake. Sounds pretty easy, right? Now that I had an easy way to store the frozen dough, I needed to increase production. So I started looking around on Marketplace and eBay, trying to find some good deals on the same bread machine that I currently had, which was made by Well-Built, probably in the 90s or early 2000s. My model number was ABM1L23. I was able to pick up a few for somewhere between $50 to $75 a piece. I currently use 3 machines that will make 6 loaves to go in the freezer in under an hour and a half. I did learn, however, through trial and error, that I can't just fill the freezer with bread dough, because after about 3 to 4 weeks, the yeast loses its effectiveness and the bread just won't rise very well even throughout the night. I usually do 3 rounds of bread dough on a Saturday morning, which gives our family of 4 about 3 to 4 weeks worth of bread. A 50-pound bag of bread flour usually lasts us about 5 months, which is about 10 pounds per month. 1 pound bag of yeast lasts probably longer than that for us, and we keep it stored in the freezer to keep it fresh longer. So fast forward a couple years, I had a friend who recommended a family grain mill made in Germany, which will mill all sorts of grains, but I mainly wanted it to start milling whole wheat berries. So I started buying 50-pound bags of hard white and hard red wheat berries from a local bulk food store for about $45 a bag. I was mainly buying it to put in Mylar bags and 5-gallon buckets for long-term food storage because wheat berries, properly stored, have about a 30-year shelf life. In the meantime, I found a promising whole wheat bread recipe, which was great because whole wheat berries were more affordable than buying whole wheat flour. Okay, so if you're using the family grain mill hand crank to grind out flour for making homemade bread, you're going to quickly find yourself exhausted. After about 2 weeks, I decided to buy the attachment for my KitchenAid mixer, which made work a lot easier. To get the flour fine enough for good bread, I would have to run it through the family grain mill at least twice. Once on a coarse setting, and then one more time on a really fine, like the finest setting it had. Unfortunately, it was a really hard workout on my mixer as well. So I would have to run my mixer for about 10 minutes on and then 5 minutes off to let it cool down before running it again. This would take a couple hours to get enough flour for about 4 loaves of bread. After a few months of this, my wife was wanting to pull her hair out. So after a while, I decided that it was time to make an investment in an electric grain mill. After extensive research, I decided on the Wonder Mill. I absolutely love it. It wasn't cheap, but the $250 on sale was well worth it. They're durable, they're fast, they're efficient, and they have a great warranty. So now you have the background of how we went from hard as a brick bread to fresh, delicious whole wheat bread made from freshly milled wheat berries right here in our kitchen. I heard that wheat berries contain 40 out of 44 essential nutrients for life. However, it is important that those wheat berries be milled fresh and used as soon as possible. This is because fresh milled flour can lose 90% of its nutrients in just 3 days. I used to mill a bunch of flour in advance and let it sit in sealed Tupperware containers for 3 weeks or so before I would actually make the bread. Now I know better. I want the food that my family eats to have as much nutritional value as possible. So with that being said, let's make some bread. All right, so now I'm going to show you guys how we make bread. I keep my wheat berries stored in these totes. I can keep about 10 bags of wheat berries in the pantry. These are hard white. It's 7 cups of wheat berries that I can keep in a gallon, and that's about how many I can do in my bread machine. Always turn the Wonder Mill on first. Just finished grinding 7 cups of wheat berries. This Wonder Mill is so nice and fast. It took about 2 minutes to grind all that flour. That would have taken me probably about 2 hours with the hand crank family grain mill. So then I just put the flour in here. I'm going to go ahead and start putting the other ingredients in the bread pans. Over here I have 6 pans, and I'm going to start with putting 3/4 of a cup of water in each one. my warm water in all 6 pans. One thing that I want to tell you from experience not to do is to forget to put these paddles back in the bread pans. It's really messy if you have to put them in after all the ingredients are in there. Second thing I add is yeast. This recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons per loaf. What I do is I keep this in the fridge, and then I keep individual baggies in the freezer. It keeps them fresh until I need them, and then I just fill this up. 1.5. Okay, now that the yeast is in there, I'm going to put 1 teaspoon of salt in each of these. Next ingredient after the salt is bread gluten, well, wheat gluten I should call it. And I buy this at the local bulk food store as well. This bag would probably last me a year, and it's like $3. So the wheat berries themselves don't have as much gluten as the high gluten white bleached flour, so you have to add it to the wheat flour. After the 1/2 teaspoon of gluten, I add 1 tablespoon of lecithin. There's different types of lecithin, different forms of it. I buy the powder lecithin. It's dried. It's sunflower lecithin. It seems to work pretty well. The other thing that you can use is egg yolks. You would want 1 egg yolk per loaf of bread, and I found that it gives you a pretty similar texture of bread when you're done. Is oil. I want to put 2.5 tablespoons of oil or coconut oil. After the oil, we put 2.5 tablespoons honey, or if you don't have honey, I've used pure maple syrup, sugar if I'm in a pinch. Easiest way is I take these squeeze bottles and squeeze about 12 seconds worth. For now, I've just been buying the Clover honey at the grocery store. It's fairly inexpensive, works well. Eventually I want to buy honey in bulk, like in 5-gallon containers, so it'll be a little cheaper. So the last thing to put in, 2.5 cups of whole wheat flour, freshly milled. Stuff that in there. 2, and then 1/4 cup. So now I have no bleached white flour at all, just all whole wheat flour. Now that all the ingredients are added, we're going to go ahead and put all of these pans in the bread machines. Close the lids. Going to hit the start button. Okay, now all 6 loaves will be done in approximately 60 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and set the timer for 60 minutes. So this is what the bread looks like about 55 to 60 minutes after putting it in the bread machine. This is what the bread loaves look like after about 60 minutes of being flash frozen in the freezer. I'll put these in freezer bags, stick them in the freezer, and I can put the fresh bread loaves in the pans. So far I have 12 loaves in the freezer, and I'll be adding 6 more in about an hour. Okay, after I get the frozen loaves out of the bread pans, now I've got room to put the fresh loaves in there. And make sure you get the paddle out of the bottom of the bread dough. See, this just looks so good. They're in the pan. Do the same thing with the remaining ones. Then I just put them in the freezer for at least an hour. A couple hours would be even better. And then as long as I eat them within the next 3 to 4 weeks, it stays fresh. So this is what the bread looks like first thing in the morning after risen. Set the oven to 350 degrees, bake for 20 minutes. We're at the end of the video. It's time for a taste test. I'm going to put a little butter on this slice of bread because everything's better with butter. That's good bread. But more importantly than anything I've said in this video is this. Matthew chapter 4 verse 4 says, Jesus told them, a man shall not live on bread alone, they must feed on every word of God. Take the time, read scripture, it's life-changing. Thanks for watching my video. I hope it gave you some practical ways to have healthy, delicious bread at home without having to labor in the kitchen for hours to do it.